Good afternoon, everybody. Okay, today we will start one of the most interesting and probably favorite subjects of many students, if not everybody. I guess not everybody, but certainly many students. Existentialism, 19th century movement. We will go over two most interesting representatives. First of all, Soren Kierkegaard, who is a Danish philosopher and considered to be actually the founder of that movement, even though he himself did not know he was going to start a movement. And then we will get to Nietzsche, who is German philosopher, and they are interesting for many reasons. Well, first of all, just a few words about existentialism. Existentialism actually picked up mainly in the 20th century. In the end of the book, there's a philosopher, French philosopher, Sartre, who we will not really cover because we don't have much time for him, but he actually is well known for being an existentialist, and actually that's when the name existentialism appeared. But the roots go back to the 19th century, to Soren Kierkegaard and Friedrich Nietzsche. And interestingly enough, they are in many ways similar, but they are radically different in one important point. Kierkegaard was a passionate Christian. He believed in God. That's a very important part of his philosophy. Nietzsche was equally passionate atheist. He actually said many things which some people may find offensive. He was very anti-religious and anti-Christian in particular. Although it's hard to exactly say he was anti-Christian, because he did say that he admired Christ himself. He was mainly against Christianity as a religion. But we will get to Nietzsche in the end. We will start with Kierkegaard. Now, few things, however, are very similar for both of them, for Kierkegaard and for Nietzsche, and for the 20th century existentialists. First of all, they all emphasized passion over reason. This is something new in the 19th century, and we saw a little bit of that in Hume. Remember, Hume was saying that we are not driven by reason, we are driven by passion. So in that sense, he kind of predated that. In the 19th century, it will become rather strong in philosophy. The questioning of reason. How much can we actually get from reason? How important is reason for us really? And for many philosophers, passion and feeling is actually more important than reason. Some of them even dismiss reason completely and say it's not that important to us. We can get away without reason. What we cannot get away is without passion, without some sort of human touch. Subjectivity over objectivity, we'll talk more about it today. It's also interesting that if prior to that philosophers were trying to be objective as possible, and we're trying to find this absolutely clearest objective point of view. Now philosophers started questioning that and asking, well, do we even need to be objective? What does this objectivity really do for us? And finally, the importance of individual person. In fact, as we will talk about especially next time, this is one of the criticisms Kierkegaard has for Hegel. He's saying Hegel's philosophy is rather impersonal, but individual is important. Kierkegaard never read Marx. Marx was not well known until quite a bit later. Marx never read Kierkegaard either. In fact, Marx was somewhat known towards the end of the 19th century during his lifetime because of some controversies his revolutionary ideas created. Kierkegaard was not known pretty much at all until the 20th century. he's one of those philosophers who only became known long after he died. He wrote quite a lot. His books were almost never read. He had maybe 200-300 copies sold. In Copenhagen itself, he was relatively well known amongst educated people, but not even because they read his books, but for other reasons, as we'll talk about today. And then, as 20th century came, it suddenly turned out that the ideas he had are very interesting and important. And then people started reading his books and going, wow, that actually is amazing. But while he was still alive, very few people cared. Okay, so this is the painting of Soren Kierkegaard we have. He kind of looks very young here. He was not really a bad-looking guy, but he had some problems with his spine, so he wasn't exactly an athlete or anything like that. And many of these determined who he was. Okay, so first of all, he was born on May 5th, 1813 in Copenhagen. So if you keep in track of all these dates, you may notice that for one thing, we talked about Hegel. Well, Hegel obviously was still alive. Hegel died 1831, then Kierkegaard was at that point 18 years old, and he was already a student at the University of Copenhagen. This is important also because we know for a fact, of course, that he read Hegel, and his philosophy was in part inspired by Hegel. But like I said, he did actually criticize Hegelian philosophy, and there's an interesting controversy about it in scholarship, because when he attacks Hegel, very often he attacks not really Hegel himself, but some sort of a distorted representation of Hegel. So why is he doing that? It's kind of hard to say. Some scholars suggest that perhaps he attacks not as much Hegel himself as the Hegelians. People in Denmark in particular who were considered followers of Hegel's philosophy, who tried to present it in their own way, and so they were distorting it, and so Kierkegaard attacked this distorted version. Now, how truly did he understand Hegel himself? Well, it's hard to say, because, like I said, in his work, it seems to be based on, badly based on Hegel, but it's not exactly like, you can always say that if Hegel knew about Kierkegaard, if you read Kierkegaard, he would probably say, this is not what I mean at all. You are attacking somebody else's view. But of course he never did, because like I said, Kierkegaard was not even known until the 20th century, and by then both of them were long dead. Now, his life events did have an important influence on his philosophy. One of them is with his father. His father was an interesting figure. When Kierkegaard entered university, his father wanted him to major in theology, to become a priest. Kierkegaard himself switched towards philosophy. He was more interested in philosophy than in theology, so he was interested in God and in religion, but first of all, it grew over his life. And second of all, his take on it was different than the traditional take which the Church of Denmark, for example, has. Okay, so we missed this. Okay, so this is an important slide. The 4 turning points in Kierkegaard's life. First of all, relations with his father. We'll go over them a little bit in more detail now. Second of all, the relationship with his only female lover. The love affair. Third, the battle with the press. He did get engaged into a battle with at least one Copenhagen magazine. And finally, the battle with the Danish church. Like I said, he did not accept the traditional religious point of view. Okay, so let's start with his father. Who was his father? An interesting guy. He actually was born a simple peasant, poor family. no money. He moved to Copenhagen when he was still very, very young. He became an apprentice. Then he became a businessman. No, that's already capitalism to you. Not a noble person. No inheritance or anything like this. Self-made man, made himself a fortune. He became one of the wealthiest people in Denmark. At the age of 40, he was able to retire. He had so much money, he did not need to work anymore. Now, as you also can probably imagine, to become that wealthy that quickly, you do need to do certain things which probably are not very moral. And that's, I guess, what happened. And for this reason, he himself, Kierkegaard's father, being very religious person, religious Protestant, and remember Protestant religion is kind of similar to Catholicism, but it's more free in a sense. He had this tortured sense of guilt. He felt like he may have become rich and wealthy and accomplished a lot, but morally he made many things he was not proud of. So he wanted his children to be different. He wanted his children not to repeat his mistakes. And he was kind of trying to give them this very stern, oppressive religious upbringing. He wanted them to become religious and to become moral, unlike what he was doing while he was earning this fortune. Now, as a result, Kierkegaard himself was not very happy when he was growing up. He was trying to rebel against all that, against this religious pressure. He felt, as we can imagine, all kids, all young people have this kind of rebellious attitude, especially if your parents want you to do something, go to church or whatever it is, and you just try to avoid it. So at first he was trying to do just that. Instead of being this kind of moral religious person, he was trying to be this kind of a playboy, a man of town, humorous, flamboyant, cultured. So that, however, did not make him happy at all. This is from his diary, one of the early entries in his diary. He says, "I have just returned from a party of which I was life and soul. Wheat poured from my lips. Everyone laughed and admired me, but I went away, and the dash should be as long as the earth's orbit, and wanted to shoot myself." So essentially, while pretending to be enjoying all that, while pretending to be this kind of happy playboy, he was not happy at all. He was suffering inside. He reached this stage of despair, and that kind of made a particular change in him. So he slowly started to understand his father better, started to understand what his father meant, and turning towards God. He finally reconciled with his father shortly before his father's death, 1838. Note that he himself was already 25 years old at that time. He realized that his father's harsh religious training was actually a loving attempt to spare him from melancholy and guilt his father himself experienced. And with this new realization, he began understanding God's love and turning back towards Christianity in his own way. Now, relationship with his female lover. That's a very, very sad story. He actually was engaged in 1840 to Regina Olsen, young girl. She was about 18 years old at the time, and note he himself was 27, so he was already quite a bit older. She, of course, loved him and wanted to marry him, but after 13 months, he decided to break off this engagement. Why? Why did he want to break off the engagement? Well, couple of reasons at least, and lots of it actually is in his diaries. He was keeping diaries, so you can know what was going on in his life by just reading that. First of all, he felt like his melancholy, his sad personality may weigh her down. But perhaps even more importantly, he felt that he is not meant to have a family, not meant to be a regular person with the family life and children. He felt like he has a more unique mission, something to perhaps contribute to the understanding of the world. So his books, his writings. And for this reason, he decided to break off with her. Yeah, I know it's hard to imagine they have romantic experiences, but they actually do. Many philosophers were never married, but some philosophers were married. Some philosophers had normal life. By the way, Hegel, we never mentioned that, but Hegel actually had a wife and the family and the children, and when he died, his wife was really devastated. He actually had a rather normal family life. Kierkegaard did not have a normal family life, but he still had this romantic relationship. And usually I don't mention it because in case of Hegel, that doesn't even matter for his philosophy, right? I don't want to give you his personal life story unless it's connected. In case of Kierkegaard, it is connected. And it tells us a lot about why he was writing the way he did. So he broke off the engagement, but he did it in a really horrible way, because what he, for some reason, decided he should do is not to just break off with her, but to act in such a way that she would break up with him. He thought that would be better. He thought if he will act like a total douchebag, like a horrible person, she would just think, I don't even want to be married to this guy. So he started acting like that. And she still loved him, and she did not understand why is he acting like that. Why is he being such a horrible, horrible person? So the whole thing turned into a complete torture. And eventually they did break off, but went through a very, very painful period for both of them. Totally kind of insane and unreasonable. And after he broke off with her, he went to Berlin to attend lectures. By that time, it's 1841, Hegel was already 10 years dead, but one of his best friends, another well-known philosopher, Schelling, was lecturing there. So he attended Schelling's lectures. And I didn't mention Schelling when we were talking about Hegel before, but they had a disagreement, and Schelling's philosophy was a lot more God-oriented and religious-oriented than Hegel's philosophy. So that kind of also explains a little bit about Kierkegaard, because he attended those lectures. It actually did kind of have some impression on him. So that is kind of important thing too. This is her, is that a picture? No, it's probably a painting. Too early for picture. She's at 1840. That's just when they were engaged. Again, he was 9 years older. Unfortunately, there are no pictures of Kierkegaard himself, just that couple of drawings. Okay. So, battle with the press. That's another thing which happened a little bit later, but had a big effect on him and on his life. He actually was thinking about retirement, about becoming priest maybe in a small church somewhere in the countryside, and he published several works prior to 1846, which actually got pretty good reviews from this popular newspaper, the Corsair, in Copenhagen. But his latest work, which he published in 1846, the concluding postscript, one of the most important, as we today consider, got a very bad review. Corsair actually didn't like it. Now, he probably should have just ignored it. Most people would, and it would have been a smart move, but being a little bit of a strange person, he actually decided to write to the editor a letter, and in that letter he said something like, well, you were praising my previous work, but you are such a horrible horrible newspaper, that the praise from you is worse than criticism. So now that you don't like my most recent work, I'm very happy. But I'm begging you also to take back all the praise you gave to my previous work, because it kind of tarnishes it. It's not really. I don't like it at all. How about you just say bad things about all of my work, and then I'll be happy. So the editor actually did just that, and they started this whole battle against him. They published a lot of very bad reviews and caricatures and so on. So he became kind of notorious for that in Copenhagen, not for good reasons, because people were not reading his books, but they were certainly reading this newspaper, and that made his life actually hell, because people were looking at him everywhere, and people were actually not on his side, they were on the side of the newspaper. So that had a pretty bad effect. What do you mean that actually happened in real life? About him breaking off his engagement? Well, yeah, like everything I'm telling you guys, that is what happened in real life. That's not a fairy tale. This is actually documented. If you are interested to read about his biography, good books on Kierkegaard, just not so much concentrating on philosophy, but just on his life. Unlike Kant, for example, who, like, remember I told you that was not a very interesting person in his personal life or in whatever was happening around him, just his philosophy is interesting. In case of Kierkegaard, his entire life is quite interesting. So yeah, that's exactly what happened. Anyway, let's look at it a little bit. For some reason it keeps on skipping pages. Before we discuss that, let's talk about the battle with the Danish church, which was another very important turning point in his life. So why did he even have a problem with the Church of Denmark? If he believed in God, if he considered himself Christian, you will see that in that sense Nietzsche also had kind of similar criticism. And the criticism was that the Church of Denmark and the Christianity itself became a little too safe. He thought that it was just this comfortable institution, that he thought people who go to church every day, not living up to the spirit of Christianity. Because if you look at the Christ, if you look at his teachings, he was kind of a rebel. That was a revolutionary philosophy. He was calling for action. He was very active person. And if you look at the church, Protestant church, in not only in Denmark but today in America, you may say that's totally different. It's more like you go there, you listen to the priest, then you go back home and you go on with your life. It doesn't really have this kind of revolutionary effect, if any effect. He is saying many people go there not because they even believe in Christ, but because, well, it's what everybody does. So being Christian is just becoming this institutionalized type of behavior. It's no longer, it doesn't even really matter whether you truly believe in it. As long as you go to church and pretend to believe, that's good enough. So he satirized the churchgoers in Denmark as bloated geese who met every Sunday to praise the Creator for giving them wings, but who had grown too fat to fly, and revile those that did not use their wings. So in other words, they have wings, they're just not using them. And because they're not using them, they actually don't like those who are, such as, I guess in this case, maybe himself. So okay, now we can actually discuss that. Do you think any church today is true to the spirit of Christianity? If so, which one? Can you name a church which is like true to Christianity? Of course, that assumes that you have some sort of understanding of the true Christianity. I don't know if you guys ever care about that or not, but I'm assuming at least some of you probably consider yourself Christians, right? So you should have some sort of idea what Christianity is. How can you consider yourself Christian if you don't even know what it is? But if you know what it is, do you think any church is like truly lives up to the Spirit of Christ? Well, if you think not, then of course you can't name a specific church, unless I misunderstand your answer, because the question is, do you think any church is true to the spirit of the Christianity? If the answer is no, then of course you wouldn't be able to name one, since you're saying there isn't one. Orthodox Church. Okay. Well, note that many people obviously would name their own church, because you would hope that if you belong to a particular church, you actually think this is the church that is true to the spirit of Christianity. But if you do not belong to any church, if you start looking at it kind of from the outside, you may in fact be confused, because there's a lot of differences, but they are mainly procedural differences. What exactly is the spirit of Christianity? Well, it's hard to say, and you can, I guess, understand it in your own way, but would it be procedural? Like, for example, the question whether you pray in Latin or pray in English or anything like that, would that even matter to the spirit of Christianity? But, of course, the first question here is, again, the spirit of Christianity itself. What exactly is it? Now, if you go to the Bible, if you start reading the Bible, you can get some sort of an idea there. But then again, different people may even disagree about that. And that's an interesting question. How do you understand what is the spirit of Christianity? Now, obviously, there is no right and wrong answer here, but it's a good topic for the discussion. Unfortunately, doing it online is a little awkward. Well, Melissa, you think that Christianity's spirit depends on how they interpret their version of Christianity. But don't you think that Christ himself had some sort of an idea of Christianity? Otherwise, if you say that, then you're saying, well, who cares about Christ? It all depends how we interpret it. If you believe in Christ, then you should believe that he had a clear idea himself what Christianity is. Yeah, and then wouldn't the goal then be to try to understand that, rather than just say, oh, whatever way you do it is good enough. But it's actually interesting in terms of Kierkegaard, because when you will see his philosophy, he was trying to understand just that. Do we need to go so deeply into history and so on to figure out what was the actual teaching of Christ, or can we do it some other way? Is there any other way to do that? And this is also where his disagreement with Hegel is, I guess, because Hegel, remember, said that we can move on from Christianity. And here he is on point, because Hegel did indeed consider Christianity to be somewhat of a, not the final point of human development. He considered philosophy to be more important than Christianity. Christianity is the best type of religion, but any type of religion is inferior to philosophy, according to Hegel. And this is where Kierkegaard disagrees with him. So he did get engaged in this battle with the Danish church for this very reason, because he was, especially later in his life, shortly before he died, trying to attack church for becoming this kind of comfortable institution where people just pretend to be Christians instead of really truly trying to understand what it is. Because he thought this is the important part. If you consider yourself Christian, you should really try to find out, what does that mean? What does it mean to be Christian? And that can only be achieved through passion and your personal engagement. You cannot achieve it by peacefully sitting there once a week for an hour listening to the priest talking and then going on with your regular life as if nothing happened. Now, what did he consider his goal? There's an interesting passage in the concluding postscript, that work which we already mentioned, where he describes himself one afternoon sitting in a cafe, thinking about what should be his mission in life. What should I do? And it's kind of funny, because he starts by saying there's so many people who are trying to make life easy for everybody by inventing all these things. It's capitalism, remember? People invent things which try to make your life easy. Like if you invent something which helps you to, I don't know, open cardboards of milk or whatever, you can make a lot of money. So the point is to make life easy. But he's saying, I'm really not good at that. I can't make life easy for anybody. So instead, he's saying, how about I make it more difficult? That is something I could do pretty well. So this is a quote. Out of love for mankind and out of despair at my embarrassing situation, seeing that I had accomplished nothing and was unable to make anything easier than it had already been made, and moved by genuine interest in those who make everything easy, I conceived it my task to create difficulties everywhere. So he wanted to make life difficult for people. Okay, what do you think Kierkegaard wants to make? Why do you think he wants to make life more difficult? What is the point of that? And connected question to that, does it remind you of one of the philosophers we discussed earlier? Well, having a hard life, I don't think he really meant to make life hard in the sense that, people go to jail or something. He means it in more of a spiritual way, like to wake us up so that we would not be complacent. It doesn't mean that he will break our legs or something so that we could not walk around. That's not the type of difficulty we're talking about here. So does it remind you of any of the philosophers we covered? Was there a philosopher who was trying to make life more difficult for people around? That should not be very difficult. Socrates, exactly. Good job, Louis. That's one of the key figures. By the way, he wrote his doctoral thesis on Socrates. That is his doctoral thesis at the University of Copenhagen. And it kind of explains you a lot about him. We'll mention Socrates several more times. Socrates was bugging people and asking them these difficult questions, trying to again make them wake up from their comfortable life, realize that there are certain things they don't know, certain things that they take for granted. So that's exactly the kind of trouble he's talking about. Again, that does not mean that he would make your life difficult by literally causing some sort of harm to you. It's just, challenging the views of people, challenging people from complacency. Okay, so another important point. This is where we're talking about the difference between reason and analysis and passion and commitment. So for Kierkegaard, passion and commitment is a lot more important than reason and analysis. He's saying life's greatest reward comes only to those who are willing to endure difficulties and even suffering. This is one of the important traits of existentialism. Suffering is necessary part of life. You only are truly alive when you suffer. And if you don't suffer, imagine life where you don't suffer at all. Is this fun life? Is it even life? If you think about it, what kind of life is this? You're not suffering? You're just constant pleasure? It sounds like you're dead or something, because it's hard to even imagine this kind of life. Obviously you don't want to suffer all the time, but know that if you suffer at least a little bit and then have pleasure, that pleasure will be hell a lot more valuable to you if you constantly have pleasure. In fact, if you constantly have pleasure, what will happen? You're probably not going to consider it pleasure anymore. And this is exactly what he says. Remember, when he was trying to live the life of pleasure, he himself discovered it. That if you try to just enjoy it all the time, you actually are miserable. You have to have some sort of misery in order to understand the value of pleasure. So, in order to do that, he's saying we should actually achieve some sort of self-understanding. And self-understanding is the most difficult thing in life. We do not want to do that. We prefer to observe life as some sort of spectators. Just watch it from a distance. But he's saying we can't. We can't do that. Every time we try to use reason and analysis, this is what we do. Right? We're trying to be objective. What does that mean? Stand aside. Look at it from a distance. And he's saying, well, we cannot do that because we are alive. We are part of this process. So we will never be able to stand aside and look at everything from a distance. We are engaged, and we should be engaged. So passion and commitment are a lot more important than reason and analysis. All these answers we have about what life is, he's saying, mainly just meant to make us comfortable, to make us complacent. But instead of providing these answers to our questions, he's saying he wants to provide problems for our answers and show to us that those answers we have are problematic. They are not good answers. So he wants to destroy one by one all our cherished solutions in life until we despair about everything. And he's saying when we despair about everything, we will finally realize that there's only one choice left for us. What do you think this choice is? No idea? God. God. This is when you turn to God. When you despair with everything else. Now, again, just like Socrates, he uses the method of indirect communication. Because he does not think you can tell people these kinds of things directly. You cannot just say to people, people will not understand it. Remember, Socrates would never tell people directly what justice is. He would never tell people directly what the good is. Plato tried to kind of go this way, and this is where Kierkegaard actually disagrees with Plato. And remember, there's two different people. Socrates was actual historic figure. We don't know that much about him directly because he never wrote anything, but we do know a lot about him from Plato. However, Plato was his student. He was not Socrates. So what he tells us about Socrates sometimes is not even true. He started inventing these things towards his life. And Kierkegaard says whatever Plato tried to introduce there himself is actually wrong. He does not like it. He calls it speculative philosophy. And he compares that to Hegel. He's saying this kind of stuff is not faithful to Socrates. Socrates himself never gave us any theory. He never tried to give us anything. Remember what he was saying? There's only one thing he knows. What is the one thing he said he knows? Oh no, he doesn't know what... Come on, Louis. Socrates said he knows he is wise. That's exact opposite of that. Yeah, exactly. He said he knows one thing, he does not know anything. That's the only reason why he said he's wiser than other people, because they don't know anything, but they think they do. He doesn't know anything, but he knows at least one thing, that he does not know anything. So that doesn't make him wise. He never said he was wise, but it makes him wiser than other people. So from that point of view, I guess he would agree that is type of wisdom. Nonetheless, that is important part of his philosophy. He was always saying, I can't teach you anything because I don't know anything. Nonetheless, he was indirectly teaching people things because he was asking them these difficult questions. And in a similar way, Kierkegaard is trying to do that. Both Kierkegaard and Nietzsche are not traditional philosophers in the sense that they don't give you a theory. They don't try to like present you with their views. On the contrary, their work is mainly very literary. When you read it, you don't even know if he means that. In many times he does not. He takes this position of somebody else and then tries to present it to you. Like in one of his works, for example, he again writes as this playboy, as if he is this wealthy playboy who tries to enjoy himself all the time. And he is kind of trying to describe that and to make you understand that this is a road which leads nowhere, rather than just telling you, oh, don't be a playboy, this is a road which leads nowhere. He does not directly tell you any of this. Okay, so objective knowing versus subjective knowing. This is an important point for existentialism and for Kierkegaard himself. So for most philosophers, again, the problem is how to rise above subjectivity, how to become objective, how to know the truth. Kierkegaard turns this problem on its head. He's saying the hardest task in life is not to be objective. The hardest task is to become subjective, to find yourself, to find your true, unique point of view. So our natural tendency, he says, is to hide within this shelter of objectivity. But that means not taking any position. Instead, we should learn that truth itself is subjectivity. So for that, we actually can... did I skip again one? No. Okay. Now, just a word of caution, first of all, yes, about good and bad subjectivity. Sometimes people say he is being subjective, they mean somebody is biased, right? For example, if professor gives only good grades to students he personally likes, or she, then of course we say that's bad type of subjectivity. This is not what Kierkegaard is talking about. He is talking about different type of subjectivity. What is it? Okay, the good example for this would be the same example with the three doors, which we will go back to right now. So let's look at it once again. Three doors. There's a slight twist now, because remember the way we looked at it with Hegel. Okay. We were asking, we have these three doors, right? One has the happiness behind it, the other you will be robbed, the third one you will be killed. And one thing you may immediately kind of wonder is this realistic? Is this the kind of choices you really are facing in life? What do you think? Is this realistic choice? One door has happiness, the other door you'll be robbed, and the third one you'll be killed. No, clearly not. And this is exactly what Kierkegaard also says himself. He says this is not the kind of choices we are facing. Nobody ever has this kind of a very clear choice, the happiness versus no happiness. He's saying the real choices you are facing is something like this. Say you are in college, right? Or you want to be in college. And then you are wondering, what major should I pick? Should I be, let's say, a philosopher? Study philosophy. Should I be a musician? Or maybe the third option, if you have a goal of becoming, I don't know, a lawyer or a doctor, medical doctor, let's say medical doctor. Note that this is not nearly as easy of a choice as the first one, because here you may hear all sorts of advice, and let's say your parents quite often may tell you, oh, be a doctor or a lawyer, that's where the money is. And you may wonder, well, maybe they're right, money is good, but you know what, I kind of like music. I like playing the guitar. And they tell you, are you crazy? Are you stupid? Guitar? You will never make money this way. It's ridiculous. That actually reminds me of one good example with the guy who you may have heard about, whose name is John Lennon. Do you know John Lennon? Have you heard about John Lennon? a little bit kind of before your time, guys, but hopefully you did. Yeah, he was the lead singer in the group The Beatles, who broke up in like 1970 or something. He actually was shot in 1980. Nonetheless, when he was still very young, he also liked to play the guitar. And his aunt Mimi, who was like his mother, famously was saying, "John, you will never make a living playing the guitar." And he actually made fun of it later on because, well, guess what? When he died, tragically, he was one of the richest people in America. His personal fortune at that time of his death, 1980, was $150 million. Would be a lot more right now. The other guy from that group, Paul McCartney, his friend who is still alive, is a billionaire by now. Why? Because their music is still very popular. Every time you buy their album or something, part of it goes to them because they are authors of the music. So even though John is no longer alive, but clearly he made pretty good living from a guitar, didn't he? So he kind of proved her wrong. No doubt that in general, it is kind of true. Most people don't make very good living with playing the guitar or singing. So that really is your choice, isn't it? You have to like look inside yourself and find within yourself which road to go. And nobody can help you with this. And it's not really something objective. It really is your choice. And this choice will determine your life. So this is what Kierkegaard means. You have to make this choice by yourself. You do have to make it. There's no like way to avoid it. And you have to own to it. You have to really own to it. And this is like the important difference with, again, Hegel and this kind of objective philosophy. So, again, going back here and looking at these three doors, you hopefully can kind of understand what he means that becoming subjective is the most important and the most difficult thing. Now, another important distinction he makes is about the truth. Knowing the truth versus being in the truth. He's saying that you may very well know the truth, but not live up to it. And there is an important difference there. What does he mean? Well, objective facts by themselves don't necessarily matter very much. In this book, the concluding postscript, he makes an example. He is telling kind of a story of this guy. He's saying this guy was in insane asylum. He's crazy. But one day he was able to escape it. And he wasn't so crazy as to not understand that he has to convince people that he is being cured if he doesn't want to go back there. So he was walking around outside the mental institution, and he found this billiard ball, and he put it into his pocket, and as he was walking, the ball was kind of hitting the back of him, and he started saying to himself, "The earth is round, the earth is round." Because, the ball was kind of round, right? And it was kind of hitting him. Okay. So he thought that was a good way to prove to people that he is not insane. So he goes to his friend, and the friend kind of asks him, "Oh, what happened, whatever." So he happily walks back and forth in the room and tells him, "The earth is round, the earth is round." Now, what is the point of this story? Is it true that the earth is round? Yes. Is it an objective fact? Yes. Do you think this guy then avoided going back to the mental institution? Did he prove that he is not insane? What do you think? Would you put him back or not? Imagine yourself in his friend's position. Your body who escaped mental institution comes to your home, walks back and forth, and tells you, the earth is round, the earth is round, would you say, oh, that's a very sane person? No. So what's the problem? I mean, isn't the earth round? Right, but what's the madness here? What emphasizes to you the fact that he is still insane, even though he is telling you the objective truth? Not just again and again. It's completely out of place, right? Would you expect person to even talk about it? Like, why? What does it have to do with anything? Yeah, the earth is round. You escaped mental institution, my friend. How about you tell me what's going on? Instead of telling me that the earth is round. And 2 plus 2, by the way, is also equal 4. But we don't care about that, do we? That's not the subject. So that's exactly Kierkegaard's point. You may know objective truth, but that truth doesn't matter as long as it's not relevant. So this is also what he says, the famous quote there about believe in God. And it is a very interesting quote. It's so very often quoted. So pay attention to this. He's saying, if one who lives in the midst of Christendom goes up to the house of God, the house of true God, with true conception of God and his knowledge, and prays, but prays in false spirit, and one who lives in adulterous community prays with the entire passion of the infinite, although his eyes rest upon the image of an idol, where is there most truth? The one prays in truth to God, though he worships an idol. The other prays falsely to the true God, and hence worships in fact an idol. So note the difference he is making. This one guy goes to the true house of God, he prays to the true God, but he has falsity in his heart. He is doing that as a chore. The other guy doesn't know which God is the true God. He prays to the idol, but he has love in his heart. He has true passion in his heart. So this is an important point to understand in Kierkegaard. What do you guys think? Which one is more in the truth? The second guy. Yeah, that's what Kierkegaard is saying. He's saying, it doesn't matter whether this is a real God, a fake God. That doesn't even mean anything. What matters is your feeling. How do you feel about that? Trying to figure out which God is real and which one is not, this kind of objective thing is never-ending process. You can never reach that. So if you are going to sit there trying to figure out which religion do I join, which one is more truthful to the true God, you will never join any religion, because in the end of the day, just like with the 3 doors, that is just your personal choice. That choice has to be made by you and not just by some objective evidence based on whatever objective facts, be it life of Christ or whatever else. So result versus the process. What is more important here? The process is how do you get to the truth, and according to Kierkegaard, that's actually what is very often more important than the result. Why? Well, because we are all in the process. We are not done living yet. We will be one day, but we are not. As long as we are engaged in philosophy, as long as we are engaged in life, we are still around and we are still doing something. So that for that reason, that process is more important for us than the result. How do we live? More important than, in the end, how is it going to end? Because I guess we all know how it's going to end, and it's not good. So that's also why he is using this indirect communication method, because you have to go through the process. He's saying it's like learning to swim. Somebody cannot tell you how to swim. You have to get into the water. You have to swim. Funny enough, this is actually an example he takes from Hegel. But nonetheless. And God, among other things, also should be a free choice. It cannot be proven to you. So he thinks all these attempts to prove the existence of God, remember, by St. Anselm and then Thomas Aquinas, all the tries to of them trying to prove the existence of God, is saying this is completely misdirected because, well, for one thing, one very important thing is wrong with all of them. If you compare it to, say, Pythagorean theorem, once you understand the proof of the Pythagorean theorem, you no longer have any more choice. You're done. But he's saying, well then, what's the value of you accepting it? There's no value. You can only have value as long as you don't know. So similarly, again, even if we go back to this three-door example, the value here will be when you will pick one of the doors without knowing for a fact whether or not that is the right door. So he's saying, if, according to Hegel's logic, you find out which door is the right door for you, be it musician or whatever, there's no longer any reward there for you. There's no longer any freedom left for you. This is not really a freedom. It's only a freedom if you don't know. Similarly with God. Say this door is believe in God, this door is being an atheist, and this door is, I guess, being agnostic. Well, if somebody, let's say God comes to you in person and says, why don't you believe in me? I'm God. There's the proof. I can create a miracle right here. Then you have no choice, right? You've been proven beyond reasonable doubt that there is God. But then what's the value in you believing in God? The only value there is you don't know. And if you don't know, and if you take this kind of leap of faith, if you actually believe despite the fact that you don't know, then it has value. Because now you are taking a risk. There's a risk there. Maybe you will die and find out that there's no God. Or maybe you will find out that there is. Knowing for a fact that there is God and there is paradise and hell and so on would take all this value away. You will no longer have any freedom. You will have to believe in God because you will know there is God. So he's saying this whole thing, the way Hegel and some of the other philosophers look at it, is misdirected. Note that Hegel actually says more or less that there is no God in a sense of the Bible. But nonetheless, Kierkegaard thinks that his whole approach to freedom is also somewhat misguided. We can never have this kind of complete certainty. And faith must be something I can stake my life on without certainty. I can never have this complete proof that God exists, but nonetheless, I have to believe in God. We'll go more into detail how he justifies that and how he explains it next time, but this is kind of important to understand. So anything that is almost probable or extremely and emphatically probable is something he can almost know, or as good as know, or extremely and emphatically almost know, but is impossible to believe. The only thing you believe is the thing which you actually don't know, but you just believe it. There's actually Socrates at trial moment, which we can mention here. I don't think you guys remember this part. I am pretty sure I mentioned that. Anyway, at one point Socrates, during his speech in a trial, does say that he does not know whether there is life after death. Nonetheless, he is not afraid to die. Why not? Do you remember he is saying, well, if there is no life after death, then who cares? That really is not going to make any difference because I would never even know about it. But if there is life after death, well, then I'm prepared because I lived my life honorably. I've been pursuing the good, so I'm not going to be disappointed in that case either. So either way, I'm a winner here. No doubt that he again says that he does not know what will happen. If he told you, I know there's life after death, I know there is like this beautiful paradise and God is waiting for me, that would devalue his belief. Because then you might say, well, if you truly think that, then of course you would live honorably. because you're simply afraid of going to hell. Note that actually Plato did kind of move towards this direction, because remember in Plato at some point starts saying that, oh yes, there's definitely this world of forms, and the souls after death are able to either stay there or they have to come back and live another life and so on. So he actually is trying to present it already as some sort of knowledge. And this is where he probably went beyond Socrates. But Kierkegaard sticks with Socrates. He's saying one of the most beautiful things in Socrates is that he says, I don't know if there's life after death. Nonetheless, I live my life as if there is, because I can never have this knowledge. But the important point is not to have it, and despite that, still be a good person. Still live your life as if there is God, as if there is life after death. And remember another important Socratic saying, knowledge is recollection. Now, again, Plato tried to expand on that by saying that, what does that mean? It means that we can go back, we keep on going back and again. So the way we lived our previous lives, you can remember certain things from that. So this is how recollection works. You lived before, and then you died, and then you lived again, and then you died, and now it may be like your 100th life or something. So all the knowledge you have is from these previous lives. But this is not true to Socrates himself. So what does Socrates mean when he says knowledge is recollection? Well, this is what Kierkegaard is saying. If this is like you, right? Where do you find the truth? Remember, we were talking about how the truth, whatever it is, God or whatever, is outside, and we're trying to understand these objects outside. For Kant, for Hegel, this is like yourself, this is an object or whatever. And you are learning that, and there's two-way or whatever relation. Now, what Kierkegaard is saying, no, it's here. It's inside you. So that's why knowledge is recollection. To know things, you have to know yourself. You have to go inside yourself. That's the only true way to know things. He doesn't mean that you can find within yourself that 2 + 2 = 4. To him, 2 + 2 = 4 is not knowledge. It's nonsense. It's nothing. It doesn't matter. What is important? Your true self. And that's not 2 + 2 = 4. It has nothing to do with 2 + 2 = 4. It's not math. It doesn't mean that math is useless. It just means that's not one of those important things you should learn. So truth is inwardness. And that's why knowledge is recollection. That is something you can only find within yourself rather than learn it from other people or outside world or whatever. And this is also where you can find God. So one more thing which we will mainly cover next time, but just to give you a preview of that, in his other very well-known work, Fear and Trembling, he is talking about the story of Abraham and Isaac. Do you guys know this story? Did anybody read it in the Bible? It's actually in the Old Testament. Abraham and Isaac. What's the story? What happened there? No? Okay, so let me refresh your memory, because we will talk about it next time, but it is important. So Abraham was one of God's chosen people. And God promised him that he will have a son. But when he was like 100 years old, and his wife Sarah was like 90, they still did not have a son. Abraham nonetheless believed God. So he continued believing that he will have a son. And a miracle happened. His wife Sarah, who's been like 90 years old, conceived. And he had a son named Isaac. But that's not the end of the story. Then God actually tells Abraham, take your beloved son Isaac and sacrifice him for me. So imagine the situation. He was waiting for this son for his entire life, and God gave him his son. He loves him dearly, and now he has to sacrifice him because God told him to sacrifice his son. What does Abraham do? He takes his son, he goes to the Mount Moriah, where he is supposed to sacrifice him. It takes him several days to get there. He goes up on top of the mount, sacrificial fire. His son actually asks him, where's the lamb? Because he never told his son he will sacrifice him, obviously, but he did take him with him. And Abraham is saying that God will provide the lamb. So then he ties up Isaac, he takes a knife, and he is about to kill him. And then he sees the lamb. And he understands that this is a sign from God. So instead of Isaac, he sacrifices the lamb. Isaac has been given back to him. Now, Kierkegaard will take this story and try to explain what true faith is and what is fundamental about belief, about faith. So this is a very important story, and like I said, his work Fear and Trembling is pretty much all about that. He goes over this story and tries to understand what is Bible trying to say. It's quite interesting. So okay, that's what we will talk about next time. I guess for today that's pretty much all we have. Do you guys have any questions? Anything you want to say? Okay, I guess no questions. Well, you can use this last few minutes if you want to know anything about the exams or whatever. But I guess if you are good, then we can wrap it up. Now, should we finish a little bit early? Alright, well, as usual, I'll post this video so you can rewatch it if you want. I would kind of advise you to read Fear and Trembling if you have time, because it's a pretty cool book and it will be easier then for you to understand what we're talking about next time. But we'll go much deeper into Kierkegaard's philosophy next time, and hopefully you will understand it a little bit better. Like I said, it's one of the favorite subjects for most students. Okay, with that, I guess that's it. I see some people leaving already, so we are, I guess, done. See you on Wednesday.